In this week's show, our guest is musical artist Ari Lesser. He's a Jewish American rapper, singer, and songwriter. He's known for his advocacy for the state of Israel and Jewish religious life and lifestyle. He studied political science and has performed with Elbaz, Lipa, Schmeltzer. He has also done performances with the band Moshav and Nissim Black. In 2008, Mr. Lesser became religious and took a Nazarite vow in 2009, and that's the Hebrew term for this vow is the Nazir. On March 30th, he posted on Facebook an article called "It's Not Easy Being a Nazir in the 21st Century," discussing his experience with modern Orthodox high school that decided not to have him visit their students due to their religious outlook, which seems to be against this tradition. So we wanted to welcome you to our show and for you to share a little bit about your background and this experience that you were discussing in that article, which is important for our listeners. We talk a lot about biblical traditions, about Judaism and anti-Semitism. And we wanted to know, how has this tradition affected your life, and how do you relate to other Jews in relation to it?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to be here. Where should I start? What do you
So in the article, it says that in 2008 is when you started connecting more with your religious tradition, and then in 2009 you took the Nazir vow. So tell us, what was the impetus for partaking of this vow, and how is it implemented in our modern age?
Sure. So the Nazarite vow, it's written in the book of Numbers in Parsha Naso. There's this whole story of first is the story of the Sota, which is a wife who secludes herself with another man other than her husband, and it's unknown what happened. And there's a whole procedure for her, what she should do. And then immediately after that in Parsha Naso, it gives the whole account of the Nazir, which it tells these details of a vow. There's three main aspects of the vow. One is to refrain from grape products. One is to not cut your hair. And one is to not become contaminated to human corpses. So actually, they break down to 10 different mitzvahs. So of the 613 commandments, 10 of them are only for Nazirim. They're directly related to Nazirim. 5 of the 10 are different grape products. So no wine, no fresh grapes, no raisins, no grape seeds, no grape skins are 5 different. Those are 5 of the 613. And then you've got no cutting the hair is another one. No touching a corpse, and also no coming into a building with a corpse. And then so those are the 8 negative ones, and then there's also 2 positive commandments. One is to do the procedure of the offerings of a Nazir who finishes their vow, and then the positive commandment to grow your hair. It's a positive mitzvah for a Nazir to grow their hair. So those are the 10 restrictions and positive commandments connected to a Nazir. And there's really not that much explanation of why someone takes on Naziris. It doesn't actually say why. It just tells what it is. It details it, and very little outside explanation. So for me, the year I took it on, it happened to be Parsha Naso that week, and a lot of hashgacha pratis, synchronicity was going on in my life that week. Strange things that I couldn't really understand, but very much felt like Hashem was moving pieces around in my life, and clearly not coincidences. And I didn't understand why, though. It didn't make sense why. It wasn't like good stuff. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't definitely was not obviously apparent what it was all about. And when I read the Parsha for the week that all this was going on, there I see the story of the Sota. And really a lot of the stuff in that story resonated with what I had seen that week, without going into too much detail. But when I read the story of the Sota, the wayward wife who secludes herself with another man. I was like pretty amazed that that's what was in the parsha this week, that after this week that I had experienced. And then the parsha after that story just goes right into this whole thing about a Nazir. And I'm like, wait a minute, I wanted to hear more about that sota thing. What is this Nazir business? This has nothing to do with that sota. So I decided I'd look a little deeper into it. And in the commentary, it says, why are they juxtaposed? Why do we have the Nazir coming right after the sota? Is because the reason someone takes on this vow, it doesn't give a reason in the Torah why someone would take on the vow. It just says any man or woman who can voluntarily take on the vow of Naziris, but it doesn't say why they would do it. But in the commentaries, it pretty clearly says that the whole reason that it's juxtaposed with the sota is that that's why somebody takes it. Someone who witnesses the sota in her disgrace, someone who witnesses that whole procedure, that's the reason that somebody becomes a Nazir. So in my own head, I'm like, maybe that's why all this weird hashgacha pratis was going on this week. Maybe Hashem was just kind of pointing me in this direction of taking on this vow of Naziris. Now, at the time, I didn't understand the implications of the vow, and I thought I could just do it for a temporary amount of time, because that's what it seems to say in the Torah. So I decided I would take it for 1 year. I just thought, I could easily do that. I don't eat grapes for a year. Don't go to any funerals for a year. Don't cut my hair for a year. It's easy. That doesn't sound hard at all, right? So I took it on, and it was only after that I started reading more about the details and the laws and I really hadn't been exposed to the oral tradition at that time. So later, later that year, I ended up going on birthright, went to Israel on birthright and stayed for actually 10 months. And I went to yeshiva and learned in yeshiva and in Tzfat and Yerushalayim. And that's where I started really becoming exposed to the oral tradition in a major way, and learning Gemara, learning Talmud, learning Mishnah. And that's when I found out about all the extra details that I was missing, which basically the problem with becoming a Nazir nowadays is that there's not an easy way out of it. So first of all, there's 3 kinds of Nazirim. Even in biblical times, there was 3 kinds of Nazirim. There's a Nazir Shimshon, a Nazir Olam, and a Nazir Shloshim. A Nazir Shimshon and a Nazir Olam are both lifelong commitments from the beginning. As soon as you take them on, they are lifelong commitments. A Nazir Shloshim is a Nazir who takes on Nazirs for a limited amount of time, and the minimum is Shloshim, which is 30 days. So I was considered a Nazir Shloshim, and a Nazir Shloshim is they're basically required to fulfill the amount of days that they took on. So for me, it was 1 year. They have to be a Nazir for that many days in a state of purity. Basically, they have to be tahor, which for people who aren't familiar with the idea, there's in Judaism, there's a concept of ritual purity or impurity. It has nothing to do with cleanliness or dirtiness. It's a spiritual state, and it's affected primarily by contact with objects of impurity, the most powerful being a human corpse. So once somebody comes into contact with a human corpse, and contact does not mean actually touching it, but if you're even in the same building as a Jewish corpse, if you're in a funeral home and, for a funeral service, or even, you're in a hospital and somewhere in the building, there's a body. If you go to a cemetery and you are under the same tree that's also covering other corpses, all these things put you into contact with a human corpse, and then you become tameh. And that state of impurity cannot be removed by going in a mikvah. A mikvah is effective to purify people from lesser states of impurity. If you come into contact, say, with a dead, creeping animal or something like that, you pick up a dead weasel or something, you can go into a mikvah and purify yourself. That does not purify you from contact with a human corpse. The human corpse is the most impure thing on the planet. And the only way out of it, according to Jewish law, is you need the para aduma, which is a completely red cow. And there's a procedure where they burn the cow to ashes, and then those ashes are mixed with, they burn it with, I believe, cedar wood, hyssop, and this certain kind of thread. And those ashes are then mixed with spring water, and that water is used to purify people. So in biblical times, they would have a whole, we would have, a vessel of this stuff on hand to purify people at all times. And I think throughout history, they say there were 9 para adumas. For a cow to qualify as a para aduma, it needs to be completely red, having not even 2 hairs on its body that are not red. And throughout history, I believe there's been 9 of those that they've actually processed and turned into para adumas. And to my knowledge, there is none of that stuff left nowadays. So basically, we are in a situation in modern times where everybody who becomes tame from a human corpse remains in that state of impurity for the rest of their lives, basically. So that is the place where I find myself in, that I'm a Nazir who is tame, so a Nazir tame, and I cannot even start counting my year until I would get purified by the ashes of the para aduma. Even after that happens, there's another problem, which is for a Nazir to finish, even after they count their days and they finish their time, they have to bring offerings at the Beis Hamikdash, at the temple, to complete their vow. So a couple impediments for me before I could finish my year-long vow. So that's why at this point now I'm like, what is it, 2000? I'm like 14 years into it. So I'm 14 years into my 1-year vow here as a Nazir, and still waiting on the first step, which is para aduma and Beis Hamikdash, to finish things up.
What was the third kind of Nazarite that you mentioned? You made it to the second one.
Oh, see, so Nazir Shloshim is the kind that I am. That's a Nazir for a limited amount of time, and a Nazir Shloshim doesn't just mean for 30 days. It could be any amount of time that is not forever. So it could be for a year. It could be the Talmud gives a case of a woman who took it on. Queen Helena took it on for 7 years. So anyone who does something like that, even you take on a 7-year Nazir, so that's considered a Nazir Shloshim. Then you've got a Nazir Olam, which is a Nazir for life, but they have a slight leniency, which is because they're a Nazir for life, they are allowed to lighten their hair, I believe every year, something like that. They say that Avshalom, the third-born son of King David, was a Nazir Olam, and so it mentions in the Torah that he would lighten his hair, that he would lighten the burden of his hair. So a Nazir Olam is a Nazir for life, but they don't have to let their hair grow indefinitely. They can lighten it every so often. And then a Nazir Shimshon is a Nazir like the Shofet, like the judge, Shimshon Hagibor, who we know the famous story of Shimshon and from the book of Judges. An angel came to his mom and told her that her child was going to be a Nazir from birth, basically. And we learn out the laws of a Nazir Shimshon from him. There is an opinion that you cannot take on being a Nazir Shimshon, like it's something that is sort of divinely imposed upon someone, like an angel came to his mom and said, "You're a Nazir Shimshon." I don't think we hold by that opinion. So the ones who do not hold by that opinion, if someone were to take on a Nazir Shimshon, the difference is that a Nazir Shimshon actually they are never allowed to cut their hair at all, and but they are allowed to become tame. They are allowed to come into contact with human corpses. We learn that out because there's a story where Shimshon kills 30 guys and then takes the clothes off their body to give to 30 other guys. So there's no way, basically there's no way you could do that. There's no way you could take, 30 sets of clothes off of 30 bodies without becoming tame. So the fact that Shimshon did that, shows us that if someone's a Nazir like Shimshon, then they are not allowed to cut their hair. They're not allowed to eat grapes, but they are allowed to come into contact with human corpses. So those are the three different kinds: Nazir Shimshon, Nazir Olam, and Nazir Shloshim.
So thank you for sharing the story about Samson. For those that are not familiar with his name in Hebrew. So are you comfortable telling us what happened within the trip to Israel and you're studying at the Yeshiva that made you impure, or is that something that is personal?
No, I mean, so I am impure. I'm just impure probably from birth. Basically, if anybody who's ever gone to a funeral is impure. So before I even took on Naziris, I was impure. And the Talmud actually gives a case of somebody who is standing in a graveyard and they take on Naziris, and says that person becomes a Nazir right away, and they are obligated to become pure and then fulfill their time. So I think my situation is very similar to that essentially you could say that I was standing in a graveyard. I was in a state of impurity when I took on the vow to begin with. So I'm in a position where, not to fulfill my vow, the first step is I have to become pure, which is currently not possible. So I'm just kind of in limbo, basically waiting to come out of it. But I don't really, it doesn't bother me so much because, like I just said, 2 of the 3 kinds of Nazirim, they're in it for the long haul. They're in it forever. So if I never do manage to get out of it, I'm like one of those guys, that's in it to win it. And basically, I even though there are these restrictions, there's these prohibitions, to balance it out, there's the positive commandment. There's this commandment for a Nazir to grow their hair that I love. That is, if you think about it, it's like literally in my sleep, I'm actually able to constantly, my body is just doing a mitzvah without me even being aware of it. Every second, my body's growing, my hair is growing every second. So, I like to think it's like a little bit of a safeguard. It's like something that I can fall back on, that even when I get distracted and I'm get busy with life and I'm not so aware of my actions, at least I'm engaged in a mitzvah at all times. So as much as, there are these prohibitions, not eating grape products, not coming into contact with corpses, there is the benefit of it too. So it's a mixed bag,
So if a loved one of yours is in hospice, or they, God forbid, they pass away, and you want to be there for the funeral, is it that since you're already impure, you could make an exception, or you just decide not to be around that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I can be there. Most Jewish funeral homes have an area in them where Kohanim can stand, right? So they build the buildings in a way that there's an area for Kohanim so they can come to the service and hear what's going on without actually being under the same roof as the body, and so they can participate in that way. So I could also, the same prohibitions basically that apply to a Kohen apply to a Nazir. The exception being that a Kohen is allowed to become Tameh for their immediate family members, except for the Kohen Gadol. A Nazir is like the Kohen Gadol that cannot become Tameh even for their immediate family members. So I can rely on those same facilities that are there for Kohanim and participate in that way. Going to the actual cemetery, for sure, I cannot do. But for me, I've had a few loved ones pass away in this time, and for me, the process, I can engage in the process through Shiva. That's how I engage in that mourning process. And thank God, as Jews, we have this incredible wisdom in our tradition around end of life trauma that helps us to get through it. And we have 7 days where we can, sit with our loved ones and mourn and get through the trauma. So all of that is completely fine for me because there's no body in the Shiva house, right? The Shiva house is just the mourners. And so, that's how I've been able to participate and grieve, when I feel the need.
Are you familiar with Maimonides' interpretation? And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but that he sees the vow as like a negative one, where you actually have to perform a sacrifice to apologize for growing your hair, which he considers to be a negative thing, and not being with your wife or something. I thought there was something related to the vow.
No. So you got part of it there. So there is, I believe I think it might be Shimon Tzadik. I don't want to quote it wrong, but there's a sage in the Gemara who brings an opinion that says, why does a Nazir bring a sin offering, right? It says a Nazir has to bring a sin offering. What was their sin? What did they do, right? And his opinion of why the Nazir brings the sin offering is because they denied themselves the pleasure of wine. A Nazir is permitted to their wife. They do not abstain from marital relations. That's not one of the prohibitions, so there's no issue with that. Nazirs can absolutely get married, have kids, have relations, not a problem at all. But what a Nazir does abstain from is from wine and grape products. And so, according to that opinion, because the Nazir denies themselves permitted pleasure, that's a sin, and that's why they have to bring a sin offering. Now, that's one opinion. That's not the actual undisputed fact. Personally, I don't think that opinion makes sense, and I'll explain why. Because if you are a Nazir Olam or a Nazir Shimshon, right, that is a Nazir for life, meaning really you're denying yourself the pleasures of grapes and wine even more than a Nazir Shloshim, right? A Nazir Shloshim is only denying themselves the pleasures for a certain amount of time, and then they have to bring this sin offering. A Nazir Shimshon, a Nazir Olam, they never stop denying themselves. Their entire life, they're gonna deny themselves this pleasure, and yet they never bring a sin offering. So you'd think more than anybody, they should bring a sin offering. So to me, that opinion doesn't make sense, because if the sin is denying yourself the pleasure of wine, then why don't the Nazirim who keep their state of Nazirs forever not have to bring a sin offering? And I think what makes a lot more sense is that actually it's the fact that you are leaving the state of holiness, because the Nazir says it, that it says kadosh, he's sanctifying himself to Hashem during this period of his Naziris, and basically to go from that state back to mundane, regular state, that's a sin. And that's why somebody who finishes their vow has to bring a sin offering. Whereas somebody who never leaves their state of Naziris never has to bring a sin offering. So that's my opinion. Obviously, there are sages in the Gemara who disagree with me, but I logically, it just, that other opinion doesn't make sense to me. And I guess that's why. Does that make sense?
Yes. Can you tell us about the controversy with the Modern Orthodox high school and how that relates to your experience?
Sure. One sec. Someone just knocked on my door. I'll be right back. Hey, Shimshon. Michael's here. mind. Okay, sorry about that.
We're gonna run out at 40 minutes. Are you okay with me sending you another link to the last 20 minutes, or are you busy?
Sure, yeah. You want to send me another link? So, okay, should we close this out?
No, when this gets to 40, I'll let you know, and then I'll send you another link. So we got
Okay,
20.
if you okay.
We got 15 minutes.
So, the modern Orthodox high school. So yeah, so basically, earlier this year, a modern Orthodox high school reached out to me and asked if I would be the keynote speaker for their boys' high school Shabbaton. And we started planning the event. It sounded great, and we got about 2 weeks into the process, talking about the program, the details, and everything. And then they sent a message, basically saying, "This is a strange question, but you have long hair. Some of your videos, it looks like you have short hair, and other ones you have long hair. Are those old videos of you with long hair, and now you have short hair? Can you just to clarify?" And I basically explained to them that I'm a Nazir, some of the stuff that I just told you here, and also said, if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to put you in touch with my Rosh Yeshiva or my rabbi, just so you can ask them if you're concerned in any way about this. And then they basically immediately wrote back and were like, well, this is not going to work out for a number of reasons, and they're sorry about it. Bye bye. And I was like, it was very surprising because we were already well into planning this whole thing. They had reached out to me in the first place. I'd never even heard of them. And so I got the guy on the phone who had been my contact there to try and understand what was going on. And, he basically admitted that, there wasn't a number of reasons that this wasn't going to work out. It was 100% just about me having long hair. That was really what it was. And they, for whatever is going on in the minds of that administration, that was a deal breaker for them. That they could not handle having me there with long hair. So I tried to explain. I mean, like, this is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah from the Torah. I'm not doing this for some superficial appearance or something like that. I mean, I'm literally just doing this to connect to Hashem. What's the problem? I don't encourage people to do it. I explain to them when I tell my story that I don't advise. I didn't understand the full implications of the vow when I took it. So I don't advise people to take it on as well. But unfortunately, it was not. They just weren't interested in hearing about it. So it was very sad, because it's like, why is it that I wrote that story. I wrote up the story about it. At first, when it first happened, I was kind of pissed off, and I considered just publicly outing the school and saying, this is ridiculous, man, you're wasting my time. Basically, I had missed out on another gig too. Another organization had contacted me about the same Shabbos, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm doing a Shabbaton for someone else, and then they bailed on me, and I missed out on another opportunity. So it's like, you're costing me actual business. You reached out to me, not the other way around. I'm not pulling a fast one on you. You reached out to me, and your whole reason behind this is so superficial. It's so chitzonius. It's not about my material. It's not about my songs. That those would be amazing. That it would help connect the students to Yiddishkeit, help connect them to Judaism. So the whole reason is very superficial. What gives? I didn't do it at that time. I just decided, sometimes the best thing for a person is silence, and I just let it go. But then later in the year, the Daf Yomi, I do Daf Yomi. I've been following the Daf Yomi for, since the cycle started over. So we're about halfway through right now.
This is the study of the Mishnah for our listeners.
Say again?
The study of the Mishnah, is that Daf Yomi?
No, Daf Yomi Gemara, the Talmud. So
Gemara,
it's a 7-year cycle. So if you read one daf a day, then you finish in 7 years. So I've been keeping up with it for about 4 years now. I think it's about 4. We're 4 years in, and the Daf Yomi, the cycle, this spring got to Tractate Nazir, and the whole entire world was learning Tractate Nazir. And when we did the day that we finished, that everyone all around the world, and probably there's more people learning Talmud today than ever in history. Maybe, there's got to be hundreds of thousands of people who learn Daf Yomi now around the world, and everyone is all doing a siyum. They've just learned all the laws and details of Tractate Nazir, and I thought it was an appropriate time to tell this story and say, you know what, isn't this interesting? Like, we as a community, we're all sort of celebrating learning about these principles of the Nazir, and yet when we're confronted with somebody who's living them and actually doing them, which is what the mitzvahs are for. We're not supposed to just read about them. I mean, they're actual things to do, and we understand that with most things. But this concept of the Nazir, when we're confronted with somebody who's actually doing it, we shun them and we say, "Oh, no, you can't. We can't expose our children to you. This is too dangerous. This is, this is far out there. This is weirdo. What a weirdo, right?" And yet here we are now as a community, all celebrating. Oh, look at us! We learned all the details of the Tractate Nazir. It's like, what good is all this learning that we're doing if it's not for the sake of doing, right? I mean, that's why we learn Torah, is to do mitzvahs. So I wrote up a story kind of highlighting that contrast, and it really got an incredibly warm and positive reception from everybody. I mean, I posted it on Facebook and Instagram. The full story only fit on Facebook because Instagram, I droned on and on for a little bit. It became a pretty long piece, and I wasn't sure if anyone was going to take the time to read the whole thing, but a ton of people did. I mean, easily well over 1,000 likes, and I was getting tons and tons of comments, almost exclusively positive and warm, and also surprisingly, people reaching out in person, not just calling me and emailing me, even outside of social media, which usually doesn't happen on posts. Like, even if I get a lot of feedback from something that I post, it's usually on the platforms themselves. This was like breaking the bonds of social media and coming into my life from many different people in person. People are like, wow, what an interesting story. And also a lot of people who, well, first of all, I met a bunch of other Nazirim, a bunch of people who also are like closet Nazirim. And they're like, yeah, I've also experienced the same sort of shunning and discrimination from the community when they find out that I'm a Nazir. And it's nice to know that I'm not alone. I had met maybe 3 or 4 other Nazirim in my journeys over the years, but just from that post, there was another half dozen people who commented that they were, or a close friend of theirs was a Nazir, and sharing those stories. But not just that, it also, I think, touched a chord with all sorts of people who feel othered, I guess, in a way, by the community, whether that's Baal Teshuvas or Jews of color or converts, people who on the surface maybe look different, and their spirituality is judged because of the difference in appearance that they have from the rest of the community. And many of those people shared their stories, which were moving and touching. And overall, really just felt like it was very healing for me, and I think for other people as well, to share. And I saw a lot of people not just commenting, but reading the comments. And it was a really great, sometimes I post pro-Israel stuff, and you read the comments and you come away like, oh my gosh, the world is, in such a bad state and whatever. If you go through to this post and you read the comments, you'll come away feeling like really good about humanity and good about people. And overall, it was really very, very positive. And I tried to write the piece also in a positive way as well. I also did not name the organization because I'm not trying to do lashon hara. I'm not trying to call anybody out. Just trying to share the story and share a little window into my experiences.
In the last 3 minutes before our next segment, can you tell us some of the theories why they would have an issue with someone with long hair? I know that the more insular the groups become, the more like they want to make everybody look the same kind of thing. Like, what do you think?
So that's I guess was a little ridiculous about this. I would kind of understand it more if it was some insular Hasidic high school or something like that, but it's not. This is a modern Orthodox high school. All the kids have access to social media. All the kids have smartphones. You're not hiding. Like, what are you thinking? These kids are not sheltered. You can't hide anything from them. They're seeing things that are 10 times worse than 100 times worse, 1,000,000 times worse than a Nazir's long hair every day on their smartphone. So to think that you're protecting them by somehow keeping a Nazir away from them is a little bit ridiculous. One of the things they said a couple of things. One is that it's very extreme for someone to be a Nazir in modern times. It's unheard of. It's whatever, which I understand it's very unusual. But as you can see, I mean, from the post, you'll see there's a half dozen other people who, for one reason or another, ended up in this state of being Nazirim. It's part of Jewish law. Everybody agrees nowadays, even if it's not advised. If you I've heard a number of stories of kids when they learned about the idea of Nazir in middle school and they're joking around with their friends and they take on Naziris, they have to go to a beis din and get it annulled because it is binding. So it's not a question of whether it's real or not. It's just, judgment of whether you should do it or not. So that's one thing they said. It's extreme to be a Nazir nowadays. But another thing they said is there's lots of the guys in their school who have long hair, and the rabbis are making a big push to get them all to cut their hair. And it sets a bad example for you to come in with long hair and, make it seem like that's okay to have long hair when we're making this big push to get them all to cut their hair. So to me, on a number of fronts, I'm like, well, first of all, when I tell people the reason I'm growing my hair, it's for a mitzvah. I'm not doing this just to have long hair. And I always advise people not to do it. So talking to me will not encourage them to have long hair. And if anything, they'll be like, oh, maybe I thought that he had long hair because he just thinks long hair is cool. Now I see the only reason he has long hair is because he's stuck in this vow that he can't get out of. And if he could get out of it, he wouldn't have long hair, right? So second of all, I think that shows, I think, poor leadership at the school. The fact that your big push that you're going is not to inspire kids with the beauty of Torah, but your big push is get them to cut their hair. Like, why? What is that? What is that doing for them or for you? How is that making them in any way closer to Hashem? There's no prohibition. Even though it's not common for men to grow long hair, there is no prohibition in the Torah against growing your hair long. So it's not like they're doing an avera by growing long hair. So for you to make a big campaign.
So are you familiar with other religions and their view on the Nazarite vow? I know you have some Rastafarian friends, and then in the Christian community, they say that some of their members were Nazarites as well.
I've heard the concept. Yeah, I've heard that from both of those groups, connections to Naziris. Unfortunately for them, it is not actually possible. You cannot become a Nazir unless you're Jewish. That's just that's the halacha. So even if they want to pretend like they're Nazirim, they can grow their hair. They can grow their hair, but they cannot become Nazirim. It's something that only Jews can take on. Partially what that comes down to is the idea of a vow, of an oath. One of the commandments, one of the 613 commandments, is that a Jew is obligated to keep their vows and their oaths, right? So once you vow to do something, it becomes a commandment for you to do whatever it is you vow, not just Naziris. If some, in fact, there's a conversation in the Talmud about Nazir where it says in the passage, a Nazir has to abstain from wine and strong wine. You know, in Hebrew it's yain v'shechar, and they ask, why does it repeat yain and shechar? It's the same thing basically, and the answer given is the reason that it says yain v'shechar is because a Nazir is not only has to abstain from wine, but even wine that's for the sake of a mitzvah, right? And then they go and try to figure out, well, what wine is for the sake of a mitzvah? And they rule out things. They say, what about Kiddush? And they say, no, you can make Kiddush, you can make Kiddush on challah. What about that? They can't come up with any wine that you need for mitzvah. There's always another way you can do the mitzvah without wine, which is funny. We always think we need wine as Jews. We need wine for Kiddush or for Havdalah or for a wedding or for Pesach. It's not true. In the Gemara, they have a discussion. What wine is for the purpose of the mitzvah? They can't come up with any wine that you need for the purpose of the mitzvah. And so they say, well, what is it? They say the only time that there's wine that's for the purpose of the mitzvah is if somebody took a vow to drink wine. And because it's a mitzvah to keep your vow, then it becomes a mitzvah for you to drink wine. But if you took a vow to drink wine, and then you took a vow of Naziris to abstain from wine, your vow of Naziris overrides that previous vow. And that's what it means when it says yain v'shechar, even wine that's for the purpose of a mitzvah, a Nazir is not allowed to drink. So why am I saying all that? Because
Jews take vows that are binding versus other.
Yeah. So Jews have this, one of the 613 commandments for a Jew is to keep your word, right? Now, as you probably know, for all the other children of Noach, they do not have 613 commandments. They only have 7, right? They got the 7 mitzvahs that were given to Noach and his sons. And keeping your vows and oaths is not one of those 7 commandments. You know, it's certainly a good thing. It's a good thing to keep your word and to tell the truth and not lie, but it's not one of the 7 things that the children of Noah are obligated to do. And therefore, a commandment like Naziris, which is directly based on a vow, an oath, is not shaykh to the children of Noah. It's not relevant to them. Just like any other vow or oath is not relevant to them.
So when you were mentioning the compliance that everybody who's a religious Jew should have short hair, according to some people, it came to mind that people say that Jesus had long hair, and then how real could it be that a Jew in the Second Temple period would have long hair? Would it only be a Jew that had a Nazarite vow, or anybody can have long hair based on? No,
so I mean, I've never seen any prohibition against having long hair. There's no rule against it. There's no rule against it. All it is custom. I mean, now what there is a prohibition against cutting your hair in the fashion of idolaters. So if there was some sort of idolatry that grew their hair in a certain way, cut their hair in a certain way, it would be a prohibition to imitate those hairstyles. And they do talk about some of those, but that's not just growing your hair like in a regular way. And the main thing with Jews is you're supposed to grow your payas. You're supposed to grow the corners of your hair, which a Nazir automatically does, right? I have my payas right here that are, it's funny. Sometimes I can, right? Like, look at this. I look like your typical Hasidic guy over here with long payas. They're just hidden inside the rest of my hair, but I have full-on payas that have been growing for 14 years since I took on my vow of Nazir. So if you want to look, that's actually another benefit of being a Nazir is that if I hadn't taken on a vow of Nazir, guarantee you at many points I would have cut those payas. Whereas since I'm a Nazir, I have these long payas that are always there, that are growing every day. So there is no prohibition against a Jew growing their hair long. It's certainly there is a prohibition against priests. If you're a Kohen in the temple, then there is a prohibition against a Kohen growing their hair long. They're not allowed to let their hair grow. But that even gives you an indication. If a Kohen has to have a special prohibition not to let their hair grow, that implies that a Jew who's not a Kohen has no prohibition to cut their hair. So there is no avera. There is no sin of growing your hair long, even if you're not a Nazir. It's not a mitzvah. But I don't see any reason why, I can't speak of what the conditions were like in ancient Israel, of what the customs were. But I think if you want to talk about the appearance of Jews, I'm sure that the Jews there also didn't look like, if you walked through Mea Shearim or Williamsburg or something like that, and you see the Jews that we have today, I guarantee you the Jews in ancient Israel look nothing like these people. I mean, they were not wearing anything like these clothes. So it doesn't seem like modern Jews care that much about how biblical Jews looked or dressed. So even if biblical Jews didn't have long hair, it doesn't stop people from changing our style from ancient ways in modern times.
Also about the vegetarian or vegan aspect of your diet, there is some historical information that possibly James, the brother of Jesus, was a Nazir, and the Ebionites, some of the Jewish Christians, the early followers of Jesus, were vegetarian because they didn't want to participate in the temple sacrifices. What is your impetus for veganism?
Definitely nothing to do with Yeshka or any of his followers. I became vegetarian because I don't like to kill animals. I've always loved animals. Very fascinated by them since I was a kid. I like to look under rocks and look at all the insects in my backyard. I used to get field guides and try to identify all the birds in my area, and I always have loved animals. And when I got to college, I was shown some footage of like what actually goes on in a slaughterhouse, and I realized how hypocritical it was for me personally to eat meat, because I had a policy that I would not kill animals. I mean, even spiders, I would catch spiders and take them outside. Like how can somebody who has that kind of view on animals support an industry that's just constantly slaying them in brutal ways? So that was sort of a wake-up call for me that my actions should catch up with my own beliefs. And so I stopped eating meat at that point. So that was about 20 years ago. And I always tell people, that's for me personally, because I know other people that they've grown up and they are hunters, they're fishermen, and they're connected to the whole process of hunting animals and killing them, and they have no problem with it. And for me, there's no hypocrisy for them. There's nothing that I can argue for them. If you're 100% okay catching and killing animals, then eat them. I mean, better to eat them and not waste them than just kill them for no reason, right? But for me personally, since I don't want to kill animals and I have a strong aversion to doing so, it was very hypocritical of me personally to then eat them.
So one of our professors was saying that there was some vegans in our group, and he was a Kabbalist, and he was saying that they were more spiritual than everybody else because they were keeping like the heavenly Torah, the diet of Adam and Eve. Have you ever heard any of that?
Well, it's 100% a fact that in the Garden of Eden, everybody was vegan, right? Everybody was just eating, right? It says green herbs for food for all the animals. And it was not until the time of the Great Flood that mankind was given the permission to eat animals. So those first 10 generations, were a society of at least people who were supposed to be vegetarians, vegans. So absolutely. I mean, I do think that is the diet of Gan Eden. Sometimes we say, we hope that we can go back to we can get back to Gan Eden. Well, if you get back to Gan Eden, there not going to be any cheeseburgers over there. It's going to be vegan living. We're going to have all the fresh fruit we want, best in the world from the trees of Eden. But yeah, it's a vegan diet, and I for sure do feel that since I took it on, I feel much more connected. I feel much more clear and clean, and even now, I mean, I'm not a strict vegan. I do eat eggs and dairy sometimes, but whenever I do it clogs me up both physically and mentally, and I don't like the way it makes me feel. I much prefer the way I feel when I stick to the straight plant-based diet. So highly recommend it for a number of reasons, both physical and spiritual.
You mentioned two things. You mentioned that the vow can be annulled by a rabbinic council, and then you also said that it can be finished with the sacrifice or the burning of the ashes of the red heifer. Is there a mystical component of waiting until the coming of the Messiah to complete your vow, or is it based on other reasons not to go through the rabbinical route to
So yeah, a few things. So first of all, just to clarify, the ashes of the red cow are prerequisite first. That's to become tahor, and then I would have to count my year or count my days, and then upon completion of the year after getting the ashes of the red cow, then there are 3 animal sacrifices that would be required at the temple: a olah offering, which is a burnt offering, everything offered up, the sin offering, and a thanksgiving offering, todah, or they call it a shlamim, a feast offering. So the feast offering is something that is actually eaten and shared by the person who brings it and anyone in Jerusalem who they want to share it with. The sin offering is mostly burned on the altar, but pieces of it are eaten by the Kohanim who bring it, and the burnt offering is just completely offered up on its own. You're saying now the question is, why wait for the temple instead of going the easy rabbinic way out? I've thought about it, and people have encouraged it. They say, why didn't you do it? It's easy. I got some people here. We'll annul your vow. To me, there's just an idea, like it is a mitzvah. It's a commandment. Aside from all Naziris aside, it's a commandment, like we just said, for a Jewish person to keep their vows. And if they say they're going to do something, it's a commandment for them to do it. So if I can do it, if it's possible, I can do it. Why not try to do it? Why am I trying to get out of it? Why am I trying? It's not some horrible thing I'm doing here that I need to get out of. It's actually, in fact, it's giving me an extra mitzvah, right? It's giving me the mitzvah of growing my hair. So if I got out of it and I went and had a court annul my vow, basically what they're saying is you didn't understand what you were doing, and you never became a Nazir in the first place. Basically, that we're declaring that you never became a Nazir in the first place. And so it's like everything that it just like turns what I'm reckoning in my mind as a mitzvah for the last 14 years into nothing, right? Which, why do I want to do that? And why do I want to take away my opportunity to do another mitzvah, right? Take away 10 of the 613 mitzvahs that I currently can engage in. Why take that away from myself if I don't have to, right? What's the motivation? And it does, as the idea of like waiting for Mashiach, waiting for the temple, I think there is something to that too. That's not, I don't act, that's not actively why I'm keeping it, but it does keep that thought in my head on a regular basis because of it. Whereas if I wasn't a Nazir, I don't know how often I would think about, the temple and the temple sacrifices and things like that, which are, I think it's healthy. It's healthy to keep those ideas close to our hearts and our minds, and to wait, and to believe that it is going to happen, and not to just write it off. Like, because some people say, oh, so you're stuck forever, and I say, no. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the future, right? I mean, Hashem is the one who runs the world. Anything's possible, right? I could be out of here in 1 year. I could be drinking wine with you next year. You never know. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Last question. Do you think that do you feel connected with the Hasidim movement in the sense of like it's not just about being a religious Jew, but it's about going the extra mile and adding more kindness, more love, more mitzvot that point back to God and to spirituality versus just doing the bare minimum or doing it like in a mechanical way?
Absolutely. And I don't think that's just a Hasidic thing. I mean, all Jews are supposed to do that, right? It says in Pirkei Avos, which is the Mishnah, all Jews are obligated in the Mishnah. It says, don't say the Shema robotically, right? Don't just say the Shema like it's some rote thing that you just repeat every day. You've got to really ask God for mercy, be really saying everything like you mean it. So absolutely, whether you're Hasidic or Litvish or whatever it is, you should for sure be serving God with kavana, with intention. I personally am connected to the Hasidic movement, though, for many other reasons. I find it to be really wonderful. A lot of great wisdom has come from both Chabad, which is one Hasidic movement, from Rabbi Nachman is another one. All Hasidim basically trace their origins back to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is the man. He's pretty awesome mystical figure of our people in the last few hundred years. There's not many people who are cooler than the Baal Shem Tov. So I love Hasidim. I love Hasidus, which is sort of Kabbalistic teachings that are very applicable to modern everyday life, I should say, and for sure would never want to leave any of that stuff out. I mean, it just enhances and beautifies what's already an amazing, deep, and powerful tradition. So
wonderful. We want to thank you for your time, and just so you know, we are going to broadcast this interview on Wednesday. I'll send you the link for the internet version of the Radio Free Nashville thing, and then in a couple of weeks we're going to put you on our Raiders of the Unknown YouTube channel. And just so you know, we do a historical and like a little bit of debating over what is scholarly and what is conspiracy theories and stuff like that. So we've been talking a lot about the early Jesus movement and their Jewish background, but it's not from a anti-missionary or from a Christian perspective. It's from a academic perspective, and a lot of questions come up about the different rites at that time. So there was this passage that brought up about Paul took a Nazarite vow and he went to the temple, and he was trying to prove that he was legitimate within the Jewish community because of stuff that was going on at that time. So it came up, what it even is to be a Nazir, and then I saw your article. But so it's awesome to have you on.
Yeah, hopefully this sheds some light on what it is to be a Nazir. I think about it a lot, and I've learned a lot about it. So I'm glad I could share my my learning with you. And if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out and ask.